for joining us tonight. I think, Jason, maybe we'll give it a minute to see if any last minute people join us, and then you can get started whenever you want.
Sounds great. Thanks. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this evening. My name is Jason Bashand. I am the Hampton Town Planner. And this evening we're holding our master plan virtual workshop being led by the consulting firm Malone and McBroom, who has been contracted to complete the first phase of the Town of Hampton Comprehensive Master Plan Update. This first phase involves the development of the vision and coastal content of the master plan. Noah Sloven from Malone and McBroom will begin this evening's program momentarily, but I wanted to begin with a bit of context about the bigger picture of our master plan process. The last comprehensive update of the Town of Hampton Master Plan occurred in 1985, with some chapter updates since that time, so this process is long overdue. The planning board, who is responsible for the master plan, initiated the current process and established a steering committee consisting of the full planning board, members of other town boards and committees, and resident representatives to guide the development of the master plan update. As noted, this first phase of the project is being completed by Malone and McBroom. It is funded by a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration grant awarded to the New Hampshire DES Coastal Program for the coastal work, with additional funding provided by the Coastal Program for the vision component. There will be a second phase of the Comprehensive Master Plan update, which will incorporate the phase 1 work while developing content for numerous additional master plan components, including but not limited to land use, transportation, recreation, economic development, and cultural and historical resources. Phase 2 has been funded as a result of voter approval of Article 10 at the March 2020 town meeting and is expected to go out to bid within the next couple of weeks. We hope to make a consultant selection for the second phase by the end of this year. At the end of phase 2 and our overall planning process, which we expect to be around December of 2022, and following adoption of the plan by the planning board, we'll have a fully updated comprehensive master plan for the entire town of Hampton. This will be an innovative, integrated, and user-friendly document which will be utilized regularly for amendments to local regulations, pursuing grant funding, special town projects, and much more. The master plan may be best described as the instruction manual for Hampton's long-range conservation and development efforts over the next 10 to 20 years. Public participation is an essential part of this entire process, and we need your thoughts about how to shape Hampton's future. There will be a number of additional opportunities for public involvement, and we strongly encourage everyone to participate in those opportunities as well. We also invite public comment at our Master Plan Steering Committee sessions, which are held on the third Wednesday of each month. That's during the planning board meetings. With that, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Noah, who's going to lead our program for this evening.
Thanks, Jason. So welcome, everybody. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here with us this evening. I'll just first introduce myself. My name is Noah Sloven. I work with Malone and McBroom, the consultant that Jason mentioned. Also on the call with us today is David Murphy and Victoria Bruds, also from Malone and McBroom, and Natalie Morrison from New Hampshire DES. And the four of us and Jason will be taking us through the workshop this evening and hoping to really spotlight your voices and getting your input. So there are three general parts to today's workshop. This first part that we're beginning right now will be more presentation, frontal focused. We'll be giving over some information and talking about what goes into the master plan and what some of this planning, this current planning effort is looking like. Part two will be breakout rooms where we'll be breaking out into smaller groups, depending on how many people are here. Looks like we'll be breaking out into smaller groups to have more of a conversation with everybody able to participate and unmute themselves and talk. And then part 3, depending on time, we'll come back together and have a larger group conversation with everybody able to unmute themselves again. During this first part, this presentation, there will be a number of opportunities for participation. We'll have polls that will pop up on your screen at various times, asking you questions that you can select your answers to. And we also encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom any point during the meeting. If you have any questions or thoughts, let us know, type them into the chat, and we'll see them and try to respond to them. There'll also be some points where we'll have a specific prompt for you to answer in the chat. To give you a sense of what these polls will be like, I'm just going to run a quick practice poll for everybody. So you should see popping up on your screen a question, relatively simple question, between 1 and 10. What number am I thinking of? We'll give people a little while to get used to this and try that out. Okay, looks like most people have voted. Sorry if you didn't get a chance to have your result in this time. We'll give you more time for the other polls, and I can share the results. And you can see that most people thought I was thinking of the number 9. I was in fact thinking of the number 7. So good job to those of you who guessed 7. Let me make sure that that's stop sharing. Okay, so moving on, we'll get right down to business. So what is a master plan? It is a document that it serves as a guide for planners and decision makers in a community to shape the future of that community. When we're talking about the future, we're typically thinking on the 10 to 20 year range, and then you want to be updating the master plan and revisiting it. The master plan can help decision makers and planners shape budgets, capital improvements, land use and development, decide on regulations and ordinances to work towards, and help shape community character in an intentional way based on community input and participation. Master plans can include a variety of topics, from housing to natural resources, natural hazards, transportation. It's a comprehensive view of the entire community and all of its functions. Today, and during this first phase of the project, as Jason introduced at the beginning, we're focusing primarily on visioning and coastal resilience. We're going to get into details on each of these over the course of this presentation and talk more about them later in the discussions, but just as a quick definition, for visioning, this is a statement that will shape Hampton's unique identity and guide future growth, kind of an overarching view of what the community is and what it can be. And coastal resilience is focused on building the capacity of the community, coastal community, to thrive under a changing climate. Given the number of people, I'm not sure that we'll break out into smaller breakout groups later, but in case more people join us later, we'll prepare to do that. So during the breakout groups later, if we do breakouts, we'll want to know which of these 2 topics you're most interested in discussing. So the next participatory aspect right now, if people are able to find their chat control in their Zoom, it should look like a little chat bubble. And let us know if you think right now whether you'd prefer to talk about visioning in the discussions later or coastal resilience. Everybody's going to have a chance to talk about everything, but it'll help us split people up if you're able to let us know a little bit earlier in the presentation. So there'll be more opportunities to let us know later and as we talk through it. And it's not committing to too much, but you can let us know in the chat now if you have an idea about that. So meanwhile, I'll keep going. So the master plan vision, we'll talk about that first. So visioning is a process by which a community decides the future it wants and then plans how to achieve it. It can be thought of as a statement of principles and priorities that they shape the community's future and help guide the rest of the master plan. Just as the master plan can guide the town's development over time, the vision can really guide the master plan's development. So the process of visioning can be thought of as consisting of these four questions. First, where are we now? Who are we? How do we define ourselves as a community? What do we like about the community? What are the challenges? Where are we now? Where are we going? And this is kind of just based on what we've been doing up until now, and without intentional planning, where does it seem like we're going to be progressing to in the future, as opposed to where do we want to be? Now that we have this opportunity to create this master plan, what do we envision as our future in that 10 to 20 year time frame? And then, of course, once we decide that, we want to figure out how do we get there. And that consists of all those different chapters will help figure out how we get there, what kind of community participation, what kind of other changes will be happening to get us to that point in the future. So I want to give a little idea to give a little more specifics on what this could look like. We've already been doing a lot of outreach and getting information from members of the public, members of the town staff, onto what they think could go into a vision for the master plan. And we've identified some priorities that we have already been hearing, and we're looking today to learn more about what your priorities are. So these are just examples. We've been hearing that natural hazard planning and climate resilience are important, as well as natural resource protection, protecting the community's wetlands and forests and so on, and waterways. Improving the transportation capabilities and services of the town, including the roadways and traffic patterns, public transit, and making the community more walkable and bikeable. Thinking about the community character and aesthetic, how we define ourselves as a community, how the way the community looks helps us see that definition of ourselves. Community facilities and recreational opportunities. I know some specific things that I've heard talked about are outdoor recreation spaces for the public, as well as senior center and those kinds of community facilities. Housing affordability, making sure that members of the community are able to continue to afford to live in the community, and economic development in general. So that's some of what we've heard so far, and now we're gonna start trying to see what you have to say. So this first poll is going to ask you two questions. And the first question, what are the top 3 issues you want to see covered in the vision? And question 2, what do you picture when you envision Hampton's community character? So we'll get that poll up for you in a minute. And you should be able to see that now. I just want to remind you to scroll down to make sure you see both of the questions. You should be able to select multiple answers for the first question, and I believe for the second question as well, and then make sure that you click submit at the bottom in order for us to actually see your answers to the poll. We'll give a couple minutes for that, and I'll just note on the side while you're doing that, if you want to send us a chat with any other ideas you have about what can be in the vision, that option is available to you. Looks like we're about 50% of people have voted so far, so we'll give a little more time. Okay, I see one person is, Paula is saying that the submit button's not working. Paula, if you want to just type it into the chat, we'll be able to get the information that way. I'm not sure why the submit button isn't working.
Take a look and see if I can figure that out.
Okay, great. All right, in the meantime, I'll end this poll, but Paula, feel free to let us know in the chat. And just quickly share out some of those results. Top 3 issues to see covered in the vision. Community character is up there. Recreational opportunities is up there. And what do you picture when you envision Hampton's community character? A lot of people like the village-like town center with town green, and then natural parklands, summer beach destination, parks and playgrounds. So great, thank you all. Thank you all so far for participating in the polls. And we have another poll for you right away. Our second poll asking about the vision. This one, there'll be 7 different questions. It's really the same question 7 times. On a scale of 1 to 4, how strongly do you agree that each of these items here should be a priority? So 1 will indicate that you strongly disagree that that should be a priority. 4 indicates that you strongly agree that that should be a priority. And just scroll down to see all 7 of those different items. So we'll give a couple minutes again for that poll. All right, answers are coming in. Okay, we'll give about 30 more seconds. Okay, thanks everyone. I will end the poll now. And the results we have so far, natural hazard planning, climate resilience, people agree. Natural resource protection, people agree. Improving roads, public transit, walkability and bikeability. Community character and aesthetic. People strongly agree with, for the most part, people agree with all the things up here. We'll dig down into that a little bit deeper on our own later, but that's great information to have. So thank you, everyone. And I apologize if we, if I cut anybody off before they had a chance to submit. But again, there's a number of different opportunities for you to share this information. You can send us in the chat box. We'll be having these discussions later in the workshop. So you can kind of be thinking of these questions also as just starting to think about things for what you want to say later. And we also have an online survey, and you can text things to this number. I'll show this slide again at the end, so don't worry about writing everything down, but just know that we want to hear what you have to say and are trying to make many opportunities for that. So I'll move on to coastal resilience now, this other topic that we're talking about today. So we're defining coastal resilience as the capacity of a coastal community to sustain achievement of community goals and social, economic, and environmental well-being over the long term in a changing climate. So I just want to pull out a few key ideas from that definition. We're talking about the social, economic, and environmental well-being, balancing these 3 different
I think we might have a frozen screen. Give us just a second.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, there he is.
That's the same exact place that happened yesterday. I don't know what the deal is. Okay, let's just get right back into it. So I will share the screen again. Okay, thumbs up if you can see the screen. Great, thanks everyone. Okay, so I'll read the definition again, even though I think maybe you guys got that, but actually I won't read it again because you can see it on the screen. But the key things that I want to pull out of that definition are that we're thinking about the social, economic, and environmental well-being of the community, trying to balance those 3 different aspects of the community. We want that well-being to be sustainable over the long term in the face of a changing climate, which is a particularly significant issue in coastal areas. And we want to build the capacity of the community to both bounce back from stresses and leap forward and build upon our experiences from those different stresses to become even stronger and more resilient in the future. And importantly, these stresses can be thought of as both the acute stressors, like a nor'easter that comes in, causes damage, and moves on, and we want to be able to bounce back from that, but also the more chronic long-term stresses that we're seeing as a result of climate change, things like rising sea levels that are causing streets to flood on a monthly basis or even more frequently than that. So those stresses, when we're thinking about building resilience in that, it's not something you just bounce back from, it's really something you have to build forward from and leap forward. Great. So one thing I want to talk about a little bit in the context of coastal resilience is when we're thinking about these different stressors, we're thinking about the risks that they pose. We can define risk as a combination of vulnerability and frequency. So vulnerability is asking how susceptible a certain asset or an area is to loss or damage. How high is its exposure to different types of hazards, and how valuable is it, or how vulnerable is it to being impacted by those hazards, as well as the frequency, how often the event happens and how severe that event is. Is it a flood that happens once a year, or is it flooding once a month? Is it a major nor'easter that's causing a lot of damage, or is it just kind of low-level flooding that causes a minor inconvenience on the road, but regularly? So you can kind of think of the frequency in that way. And this is important because when we look at vulnerability and frequency as creating risk, and when we think about risk in this way, we can recognize that our control over the frequency of events is pretty low. When we're talking about climate change, we can try to fight that through climate change mitigation and thinking about greenhouse gas emissions. But in terms of a resiliency plan, we're assuming that we don't have control over the frequency of the hazards. So all we can do is control our vulnerability and try to reduce our vulnerability and prevent increased vulnerability in the future. And in terms of climate change, we recognize as well that the frequency is changing. Storms are becoming, or flooding is becoming more frequent, more severe flooding happens more often, other coastal hazards are becoming more frequent and more severe, so the risk is going to increase. So when we think about it in that way, if vulnerability increases, risk is going to increase a lot. Even if vulnerability remains the same, if we're able to not increase our vulnerability of our community because of climate change, our risks are going to increase anyways. So we need to start thinking about reducing our vulnerabilities, or even significantly reducing our vulnerabilities to reduce risk and make that leap forward to build resilience. So I'm going to hand over now to Natalie, who's going to tell us a little bit more about climate change and those hazards that we're thinking about.
Thanks, Noah, and good evening, everyone. I recognize a lot of the folks on the call this evening, so thanks again for joining us. Like Noah mentioned, I'm going to provide you with a quick overview of some of the key findings that came out of a recent science summary report that was developed by the New Hampshire Science and Technical Advisory Panel. And I want to share this information with you to give you a better idea of how coastal flood risks are projected to change in New Hampshire and in Hampton specifically, so that you get a better understanding as to why it's so critically important that we're factoring in coastal resilience into Hampton's master planning effort. So the first coastal flood risk that I'm going to talk about today is sea level rise. And I'm sure if you've been following the news over the last couple of years, it'll come as no surprise to you that sea level rise, or sea levels in New Hampshire, have been rising, and they're projected to continue rising for centuries to come. So on the screen, we have a chart that shows observed or historic sea level rise data in the shaded area on the left portion of the chart. And we have sea level data from the Portland, Maine tide gauge that's depicted in the thin black line. And also shown is sea level data from the CV Island, Maine tide gauge, which is depicted in the thick black line. And as you can see, sea level has been rising along our coast since about the 1900s, if not earlier. And on the right side of the chart, we have a range of various sea level rise projections that could occur if we assume that global greenhouse gas concentrations begin to decline and eventually stabilize by the end of the century or by 2100. In the blue shaded area, we have what we call the likely range of sea level rise estimates for New Hampshire. The other lines on the graph represent less likely but possible sea level rise projections for our coast, again assuming that global greenhouse gas concentrations stabilize by the end of the century. Can you click for us, Noah? Thanks. So to break this down for you guys a little bit further and to actually give you some numbers to think about, sea level in New Hampshire is likely going to rise by between 0.5 to 1.3 feet, but could exceed 2.9 feet by the year 2050. Sea level in New Hampshire is likely to rise between 1 to 2.9 feet, but could exceed 8.7 feet by 2100. And sea level in New Hampshire is likely to rise between 1.2 to 4.6 feet by 2150. But again, it could exceed 18.1 feet, although that is less likely. One thing that I always like to note when I present this information is that sea level rise estimates for our coast are much higher and much more concerning if we assume that global greenhouse gas concentrations continue to grow throughout the end of the century. And if the rate of ice mass loss from the Antarctic ice sheet continues to accelerate rapidly. Next slide. As far as coastal storms are concerned, the science is a little less settled as to what's going to happen to coastal storm frequency and intensity. But one thing that we are virtually certain of is that sea level rise alone is going to have or lead to an increased frequency and intensity of coastal flooding associated with storm events. So with things like nor'easters or tropical storms. And that's going to take place over the course of the century. When coastal storms occur on top of higher sea levels that we just talked about, they're going to effectively result in increased flooding extent and depth, regardless of how coastal storm intensity and frequency changes in the future. We also know now that groundwater is projected to rise as a percentage of sea level rise up to 3 miles inland from the coast. The percentage of rise is, oh, something's happening to the slides. The magnitude of that rise is generally expected to decrease the further inland you get. So the highest amounts of groundwater rise are expected closest to the coast. In low-lying areas where the groundwater table is already high, groundwater rise or the groundwater table may approach and may even rise above the ground surface, which could result in the expansion of existing or creation of new wetlands, and can also pose challenges in developed areas that have underground infrastructure. So things like water mains, roadway pavement beds, septic systems, and even drinking water wells. And so finally, the last coastal flood risk factor that I want to talk about this evening is precipitation. And generally speaking, the frequency and magnitude of extreme precipitation events is projected to increase, particularly in the springtime throughout New England. There are a variety of different rainfall metrics that we can look at that help tell this story. So I've just shown one here. This graph on the screen shows that the amount of precipitation falling on the wettest day of the year is projected to increase 8 to 15%. Again, if we assume that global greenhouse gas concentrations stabilize by 2100, and that's shown here in the blue line in the chart. As a result of these kind of increasing rainfall metrics across the board, the state is now recommending that projects in coastal areas in New Hampshire account for at least a 15% increase in extreme precipitation estimates. So now that I've provided you with this coastal flood at risk information, the question that I often get next is, okay, so what can we do? What actions or strategies can our community or the town of Hampton take in order to begin addressing these increasing coastal flood risks? And so unfortunately, there's no one size fits all approach, and adaptation or building resilience often consists of one or a combination of the following approaches. The first of which is to do nothing or maintain status quo. The second approach could be to avoid by prioritizing future growth and investments out of harm's way, and by reimagining what land uses we could implement in higher ground. The third approach is to accommodate or to live with water. For example, by elevating buildings above projected flood levels or designing drainage systems to account for increased rainfall. The fourth approach is to resist or keep water out using engineered or nature-based coastal protection structures. And finally, the fifth approach is to relocate or move out of the water's way and allow for the natural landward migration of coastal ecosystems like salt marshes as sea level rises. So my hope is that by providing you with this context and information about the different types of strategies that that Hampton could take in order to minimize its coastal flood risks will be enough of a sounding board or jumping off point for us to start brainstorming actions that the town could take in order to build its resilience as part of our discussion later this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Noah to take us through another poll.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. So we're going to ask you a few more questions now. So this first poll has two questions. The first question is a little more kind of general when we're thinking about coastal areas. What are some of the topics that you would like to see addressed? And then the second question is asking more specifically, what are the coastal hazards that you're concerned about? So we'll give a couple minutes to have people answer that. And again, there's a chat prompt if you finish early and want to answer that prompt in the chat box. Answers are coming in. We'll give half a minute more. All right, and I will end the poll. Looks like everyone's voted. In terms of items to be addressed, general items in the coastal management chapter, we have development and redevelopment being a top priority for everyone. And then top 3 concerns about coastal hazards, flooding specifically from the wetlands, erosion from land. Those are the 2 top ones and a few other ones. All right. Thanks, everyone. We have another poll now, digging in a little bit deeper about those solutions to coastal resilience, or building coastal resilience. So there's 2 questions here. First, what are the top 3 priorities for you when considering resiliency projects? So these aren't questions about specific projects, but kind of what do you look for in a project that the town could undertake? And then second question, the top 3 things that Hampton can do to help as a community build coastal resilience. And again, remember to scroll down and click submit at the end. Okay, most of the way there. As people are finishing up, I'll note again the chat prompt here, and this one I really encourage you to send us a chat throughout the rest of this meeting. We'll also be having the discussion soon, but to be thinking about big ideas about coastal resilience, thinking about this long-term sustainable existence on the coast in the face of sea level rise and climate change. What are some options that you think of that we should consider? And I'll give a couple more seconds for the chat, for the poll. Then looks like the last one is in, so I'll end the polling. Top 3 priorities. People are interested in actions that have multiple functions and benefits, and can really help the community in multiple ways. Supporting habitats and ecosystems is another top one. Sorry, I didn't share the results. And for the top 3 things that Hampton can do, public education is up there, securing funding from outside sources to make sure that the funds that are needed are available for those actions, are also the top choices. All right, so thanks again for your input. And again, there's more opportunities to participate in this discussion, including a actual discussion that we'll be having momentarily, and then an online survey, and you can text your ideas here. So I'll move right on to the discussion. So it looks like we have a small enough group that I think we can just have the discussion in one room. I'll see if the other facilitators here agree with that. But if that's the plan, what I'll do is stop sharing my screen so that we can all see each other a little bit better and give everyone the ability to unmute themselves. So hopefully you can now unmute yourselves, and we can begin the more real discussion. So I think what I'm going to recommend doing, Jason, do you want to take over at the beginning, and then we can partway through switch over to Natalie?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I can walk through, what I would have done during the facilitation breakout room, and then we can turn it over to that aspect. That's fine. So again, I'm Jason Bashand. I'm the Hampton Town Planner. I will be facilitating the visioning component of this. I did have a few questions that I wanted to start with, and I can't really see everybody on the screen. I don't know if that's because of how I have it Maybe you have to do gallery view. There we go. All right, I see. Yeah. And not everybody's visible there. So basically, to start, to break the ice with a few simple yes or no questions related to the vision. So raise your hands if you've attended a public meeting in Hampton before. Now, if you can't, if you're not on camera and you can't raise your hand, I believe you can press *9 on your phone to signal raising hands. And I don't know if Noah's the one who's going to see that that's happening on his end.
You can also raise your hands too via Zoom. There's an icon as well.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
So
one person is raising. I see a blue hand.
Lori raising her hand over
and
there.
Lori's hand.
Yeah.
And an
Okay.
applause.
So I have
Paula's
a feeling
also
that
raising
the
her
answer here is and some thumbs up. So I have a feeling that most people here
Yeah,
have
gotcha.
thumbs up. Okay.
Great, Paula, Lori. Yeah.
Okay. The next question was about, for people who live in Hampton, how long that you've lived here. Have you lived here for more than 5 years? If so, raise your hand to that. I can raise my hand to that as well.
About 40 years.
Well, I was going to say 10 and 20 were going to be the next option, so I guess you have those covered. So 5, 10, and 20. So it looks like we have a lot of longtime Hampton residents here, so that's great. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced damage to your property from a coastal storm. Do we have anybody here who's experienced property damage from a coastal storm?
As a kid.
Okay, Lori, as a kid. Yeah, okay.
Yes, a couple.
Okay, so there's a couple there. Good, okay. And now raise your hand if you're optimistic about Hampton's future. I'd like to think that we all are, but that was one of the questions. So, okay. So just, basically in this workshop, what we've covered so far, I did give you a little bit of the big picture context at the beginning. So far, we've covered the vision being a statement of principles and priorities that will shape the community's future and guide development of the master plan. Then after I'm done with this portion, Natalie will do the coastal management, describing how the community intends to balance quality of life, the natural and built environments, and economic prosperity in coastal areas, and included within that is coastal resilience, or the ability of the community to sustain itself and its identity through a hazard event. So I think we can jump ahead here to the questions themselves that we have for vision. And these are more just for discussion purposes. We want to hear what you have to say, pros and cons. But let's start with the first question of what are some things that you like about Hampton now? I guess we have to do the hand raising thing and see who we can call on. Is there anybody who'd like to start on that question? What are some things right now, the way Hampton is now, that you like?
Jason, there's a hand over here.
Okay, I can't see it from here, so I'm sorry.
iPad number 2. I can't.
It's Brian Warburton.
Brian Warburton. Okay, yes,
Oh,
Brian.
okay.
How
So
are
we'll
you?
start with Brian. How you doing?
Well, terrific. And Jason, let me compliment you again. And I know Ann and Barbara and Alex and others. And I tell you, I just love Zoom and I use it a lot. And I wish we did a lot more of this. But I think the thing, and I'm thinking about this as Noah, and what a great job all you guys have done on this presentation so far. But I think about Hampton, there's so many different types of things that I like. I like the seacoast. I mean, I love the ocean. I love the seasons, but I love the education structure, the municipal services, the culture we have, the education we have. And it's interesting because when you talk about the coastal stuff earlier, it came to mind to me that we really do have a lot of different areas of town that really incorporate different favorites, so to speak. If you're on the west side, you may like one thing, or down the beach, or in between. But I think the biggest aspect that we have is that we get to interface with people, thousands in 3 months, and then we're back to our local historical community. We get a wonderful historical community back to 1638. I think there are so many different things. As I said, we got just a great diverse, and I don't mean diverse as far as race, but I mean diverse as far as wealthy middle class, people just coming on, newer people moving into town. So I think it makes for a better population when you have all those groups from elderly down to, you know, up and coming folks that take part in this discussion. So I like the fact that we have all of that. We're not just in one town that's just, you know, one looks at one town as, oh, this is comprised of this type of thing. We have so many great things, and it's ever changing, and our great businesses and economic engines.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in on that question? Some things you like about Hampton now. Looks like Lori being highlighted there, or no? I thought, well, my screen highlighted you. I'm sorry. Did you? Okay. Do you want to jump in? Okay.
I can jump in. I agree with Brian. I love having the beach asset for families. I love, of course, the perk of having parking when you're a resident. I am happy also with the school system, the layout of the school systems where it's all walkable, kind of nice, like a nice little block to get to Center, Marston, junior high, high school's not far away. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in on that question? Are you seeing anything, Noah, on your end for hands? I can't see everybody. That's the problem. Okay. So I'll move on to the next part of that same question. What are some challenges that you would like to have addressed in Hampton? So we talked about the things you like about it. What are some things that you can see that we should be addressing in Hampton now, or with this plan, I should say? Anybody? Lori?
Well, the flooding, obviously, especially down at the beach, Kings Highway, Ashworth. The flooding, the freeboarding, I don't know if that's really a solution. When we hear people at our planning board meetings oftentimes saying, I couldn't get back from church, I couldn't go to the store, or I got to the store, but I couldn't come back. I don't know if we're really getting to find a solution to help the coastal flooding, especially down at the beach area, Ashworth Ave, and that area.
Okay, very good. Anybody else? I see Paula raising her hand over there.
Okay.
Paula.
Can you hear me? I don't know.
Yes, I hear you. Yep.
Okay. I think I would have to agree with Lori on the flooding issue, because it does provide barriers to certainly getting around. And, you know, to me, if there is this difficulty, which I know, you know, there's much that the town can't control because it's it's a global issue. You know, a lot of the economic development for the future and so forth is going to depend on the accessibility of the town for both the residents and any visitors coming in. So I think it's certainly a primary issue. And, you know, I wonder about times. I'm only a seasonal resident, but the number of seasons that I've been here since a child is probably, if you add up the months, it's probably greater than your age, Jason. But anyway, you know, when you look at like just Route 1 going through the marshes, what happens when there's a major flooding event and the town gets cut off from Seabrook, for example? High Street, which I live near, you know, gets flooded quite often now. So I think, you know, people are going to be moved out from, you know, those of us who live near the marshes, who live close to the water. It's a major concern. So just
Very good.
Jason?
Yes.
Brian again.
Brian. Yep. Brian.
Great comments, but I'm now going to put my chairman of the budget committee hat on, because let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, we have water issues in the entire community. But I think one of the things that is going to be critical, and Jason, you've heard me talk about this development, the word development, take the economic out of it, is really an issue that we are going to have to tackle, because the major infrastructure improvements that are going to go along with the developments occurring now, future development in areas that nobody ever thought would be developed, it's going to affect the layout of the entire community and the resources and the 50-foot lots that we just jam people into. I'm concerned, as somebody who's been here 40 years, when I see the growth, that one of the major things, Jason, that you're going to have to tackle, because we'll hope you're here forever, the west side of town is something that people rarely talk about. But we had a presentation, you remember, by Chief Ayotte 2 years ago, that to build the substation would be 1.8 million and then have personnel. The reason it's important to have these discussions as part of a master plan, do we want the town to become the end all to everybody who wants to move here? Taxes go up, services go up, resources go up. And, you know, you talk about flooding, you've seen it, I've seen it in town. We've got developments uptown, I'll use the word uptown for the sake, that are in flooded areas now. And so I think we need to wrap it all together and somehow understand and let the community know that a master plan should incorporate a vision where we regulate laws and we enforce whatever it is on the books and what we decide, and going forward legally through RSAs and planning, that if we don't do that, then all the great stuff that we're talking about could put us into a jeopardized situation, because we're a very big community. People want to live here. They want, the lady said earlier, she's right. A lot of my friends visit here in the summer and they're concerned too. Taxes going up, flooding, all kinds of issues, traffic. So I just wanted to bring that up and put it in people's minds, and it may be something for a later night, another night or another discussion. But I know from my perspective, and having been a long time town official, that I'll tell you that the development and redevelopment is going to be something that I'm going to keep my eyes on.
Great, those are great points. Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything on that question? You seeing anybody, Noah, on your end? No, okay. All right, so the next question here is, how would you describe Hampton's character? And I guess it's a two-part question. How would you describe its character, and describing it now versus what your ideal would be of that? So I guess it's more generally a character description of the community. How would you see it? Lori.
I think our downtown needs a lot of work. It needs just a facelift. It needs to bring in needs more charm. Needs something. I don't know the magical answer, but I don't know. Or if it's transportation to help bring more people to downtown. I don't know. I feel like our downtown needs some attention.
Great, thanks. Anybody else wish to jump in on that question?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, Alex. So it's how would you describe Hampton's character? So you could describe how you see it now versus how ideally you'd like to see it, but you know, basically it's a question about the character of the community, how you view it.
Okay. I guess kind of to that point, piggybacking on what Brian was talking about with the diversity, I kind of always felt like Hampton had two unique identities, being the beach town and the bustling tourist destination, and then also having that downtown area. Like, I live at the beach and I absolutely love the summertime. I love all the people, but I also love the off season, and having the access to the downtown where there's, you know, restaurants that are year round, stores, that kind of stuff. And I know, the beach gets a lot of grief about kind of the way it was laid out and how you have these 4 units jammed onto these little lots. But I feel like that's kind of what makes Hampton unique, is those things that may have happened hundreds of years ago and then built upon. And I think people like that character when they do come to the beach, because you see people with the condo developments and that sort of thing saying that it's detracting from the character of the beach. So that's my thought on it.
Great, thanks, Alex. Anybody else want to jump in on that question about describing the character of Hampton?
Jason?
Yes, Ann. Hi, Ann.
I'd love to chime in at this point if I can.
Yes.
I've seen pictures of our downtown exactly the way it is now, only photoshopped without the overhead wires and the poles. And it makes a world of difference, just that. We got close to talking about that at one point, and then I'm not sure I remember exactly what happened, but the project got abandoned and nobody wanted to spend the money and stuff. But I think that and maybe leveling the bridge small things that could make a big difference.
Thanks, Ann. Anybody else on that question?
Jason, can I comment on my good friend Ann Conaby's point, just an FYI?
Certainly,
In
Brian.
1997 to 98, when we did Route 1, we started looking at the wires underground. Back then, the cost was almost $2 million with Unitil involved. Do I think it's ever going to happen? No, it's just not. The cost is too expensive. I agree with Ann, but we've looked at that, and most recently had to do with the same amount of thing as far as the Route 1 aspect, and we were all in favor of the Route 1 renovation. And I don't know if you're aware of that, Jason, that this thing has actually been on discussion 25 years, but I only bring that for historical purposes. The cost is just astronomical for that for that piece of area, so to speak, the 0.9 or 1 mile of road. But I just want to mention that as far as, historical.
Okay, thanks, Brian. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to the next question. I'm going to try to make this one flow as quick as possible. It is kind of a one-word answer kind of question that I have thrown in here. So the question is, in one word, if you can, how would you describe each of the following areas of Hampton now? And then in one word, how should each of these areas described look in 10 to 20 years? So we'll start with Hampton Beach itself. So how would you describe it in one word now, if you can? And in one word, how should this area be described 10 to 20 years from now? You understand the question?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so anybody want to start with that? And I know it's hard. If you can't do one word, that's okay too, but it just, let's see if anybody has any thoughts on that.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
It is tricky.
Which area we're talking about first?
Hampton Beach. So
Beach. Okay.
we're talking about the South Beach, essentially, the most active portion of Hampton Beach. Maybe is it a question that maybe we want to talk about at a later time? Do we want to? Because I mean, I know maybe takes a little more thought and time to come up with the answer. Unless I see Paula raising her hand.
No, my thoughts about what I call the main beach is congestion.
Okay.
That I actually live up at North Beach, and we very rarely go down to the main beach because of the difficulty with the congestion, and that's even pre-COVID. It was great when there used to be that little, I called it the beach buggy, that provided, the trolley that provided transportation from one end of the beach to the other. And I think that was, maybe something like that should be reconsidered again, because that would certainly help with the parking issues. And maybe even if the trolley started at the municipal parking lot in town, that would bring hopefully too more shoppers into downtown, or what might be called downtown. But like I said, the congestion, but again, I know this is tourists, it's tourist dollars, the businesses depend on all of these people. And I've only driven down that area once since Ocean Boulevard was closed. So I can't really comment on the experience with that, other than maybe it's something to think about even after the COVID, if that provides more space for people, more areas for merchants to open up, for restaurants to open up. I don't know, just a thought.
Great, thank you. Lori.
I agree with Paula. I thought she brought up good points. I remember we called it a beach buggy. We grew up on 18th Street, and I thought that brought a lot of families from the North End who enjoyed a little more peace and quiet family time, that if they wanted to go hit Playland, if they wanted some of the excitement of skeet shooting at the games and arcade, they could go and then come back. And I think it's also good to have that beach buggy potentially go to downtown to the municipal parking lot, because it would bring some people back into downtown and enjoy some of those amenities. And also, if we ever get our rail trail, which would be in that vicinity, that would help bring people to actually, that might not be able to have access to get to the rail trail to get to it and use it.
Very good. Yep. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? All right. Yeah. Yes, Alex.
Yeah, I'll go. More of the same. Yeah, I agree with Paula. And if you look at an event like the Seafood Festival, where I forget what they say, 250,000, whatever people, but I drive around the beach multiple times a day, every day. And Seafood Festival, you virtually have, it's basically a Monday day at the beach because of that transportation or the buses or whatever from uptown. And I think that gets a lot of utilization. I think it would only really be necessary too, like on the weekends. If you drive around the beach on a weekday, it's really not that bad. It's just those hot Saturday and Sundays, maybe 8 weekends out of the year that you really have that intense congestion.
Great. Okay, anybody else on that one? All right. So for the one-word questions here, I had several of these, but I'm just going to do one more so that I can move on to a couple of the others, and then we can get into the coastal part of this as well. So in one word, how would you describe Hampton Center, the downtown area, and how should it be 10 to 20 years? I know we talked a little bit about this. I think Lori had mentioned something a little bit earlier in one of the other questions about downtown needing a little lift. So in terms of the downtown, how would you describe it now, and how should it be described 10 to 20 years from now? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I think Laurie is absolutely correct. We both brought up our kids here and stuff. It's really 2 words. Hampton downtown is not a destination. Period. People aren't coming out of town to go to uptown Hampton. Talking about the Depot Square area and that sort of thing. We need to make it so that more attractive businesses will survive, parking. Ann brought up a good point, get rid of that bridge. We need to do a lot of stuff up there, but right now, and it's been that way for as long as I've been here, and I've been here 40 years, it's just not a destination that people, it's a drive-through park, unlike Newburyport and Portsmouth, where you have things to do in the downtowns.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? I'm not seeing anybody. I don't know. Okay, so I guess the next question I had here was, what values, principles, or priorities should guide Hampton's future? So, any thoughts on that? What kind of things should? I'm sorry, Laurie. Go ahead.
Oh, just say it again. Say what.
What values, principles, or priorities should guide Hampton's future? So, what should we be prioritizing in terms of the things that we're looking to do better within the next 10 to 20 years? And again, some of this overlaps with some of the things that we've talked about already a little bit. What should we focus on? I see Paula raising her hand over there.
I think 2 things that I think of are, number 1, sustainability, and whether sustainability refers to environmental sustainability or economic sustainability. But then I also think, to be realistic, economic feasibility has to be part of it, because certainly the tax burden can only do so much, that residents can only take on so much. So those are 2 areas that I think would be important to consider.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
Jason?
Oh, yes.
It's Ann.
Hey, Ann.
I think this is where it's time to talk about this, and by this I mean who we want to be as a town. Do we want to be a destination and focus on bringing more people into both downtown and the beach? Or do we want to focus on the quality of life for the people who are here? Or do we want to try and strike a balance between the two? But until we know or are able to take a good look at what we want to be as a town, whether we want to become a destination as the beach has become, especially seafood festival time, or look more at the quality of life for those of us who spent winters here too. I think that has to come first, and then the rest will fall into place when we figure out who we are.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Anybody else on that question? Okay. So I guess at this point, one thing that I just wanted to mention is that this visioning part, what we're going to end up with here ultimately is a vision statement that'll guide the rest of the plan and going forward. I did come up with something that is just an example, and this isn't by any means what our vision statement should be, but I'll read it back for your information of what a sample vision statement for Hampton might look like. And again, some of these things have certainly not been achieved yet, but that's the purpose of a vision. So it might read something like, Hampton is a model coastal community which attracts numerous visitors to its pristine beaches, vibrant downtown, and multitude of recreational opportunities. Property owners are adequately protected from coastal flooding and the impending threat of sea level rise. Residents enjoy reliable town services and convenient access to major highways and nearby cities without compromising neighborhood character. So that's not necessarily our vision statement that we're going to have when we get to the end of this, but that's kind of the direction that all this feedback that we're receiving is going to take us. So maybe we'll use some of that. Maybe people have other thoughts on that, but I just wanted to give an idea of what that might look like. So I hope that's helpful to people to hear that. And I don't know if anybody had any general questions at this point. You know, what's missing from the discussion so far in this vision component before I turn it over to Natalie for the coastal component of this? Did anyone have any general questions at this point? And I'm not seeing any. So thank you very much. We got some great information today and actually at yesterday's workshop as well. And we'll be sure to use that as we move forward. So thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere yet.
No, don't go anywhere, people. I'm just turning it over to Noah.
Oh, yeah, Natalie.
I'm turning it over to Noah. Don't go.
All right, so we're gonna shift gears a little bit and start focusing and really diving into the coastal resilience portion of the plan and getting your input in response to a couple of questions that I've lined up. We started talking about this a little bit during our conversation about the vision, but my first question for you all is, what coastal hazards or coastal flood risk issues are you most concerned about? And another way to phrase that question is, what keeps you up at night? Are there any issues related to coastal resilience that you're really concerned about and want to share with us today?
Is this when we can discuss the tides that are getting incredibly higher every year? The amount of beach for residents and tourists is definitely, at least at the North Beach since I've been coming, the beach area is so much smaller, less availability. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the sea rise going like it is, the wall, the water coming over the wall now. It never used to come over at like 19th, 18th, 17th streets, and now randomly it does. Is this the time to bring that up?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the type of feedback that we're looking for, Lori. So thanks for sharing that.
Natalie, if I could add, Laurie, great point. About 10 years ago, when I was running state parks, longer than that, I attended a meeting in Maine with NOAA folks and everything else. And what Laurie just hit on is probably one of the most important points tonight. We, from north to south, starting in Maine and coming all the way into the Seabrook Harbor, all along the coast of New Hampshire, we are going to continue to see not only the sea level rise, but the erosion aspect. And the reason that's important is not only affect properties across the coastal area in 1A, our 18-mile seacoast, but it affects that erosion really kind of creeping, in my terminology, across 1A and continuing on. And then you ask the aspect of people who love the North Beach area, how's that going to affect them coming to the beach or living near North Beach with their $800,000 million home? But that's a point that we really got to zero in on, Natalie, because it's not, from what I had heard even back then, it's not getting better. And through many reasons, it increased more of high tides, more of areas being, who's seen more riptides in the area for more than the last 15 years we ever had. But the whole ocean itself coming our way is just a massive, it's got that erosive atmosphere part of it. And I think in years to come, it is going to affect whatever we do. But that's a concern that I certainly share with Laurie and others, Jason as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone else? Paula?
I just want to mention, I'm right now reading this book called Rising, which maybe Natalie's familiar with it. It's called Dispatches from the New American Shore. And I'm only a couple of chapters in it. And the author, who's at Brown University now, but she actually studied creative writing at the University of Southern New Hampshire. Is that Southern New Hampshire University? She taught at Bates College in Maine. And she went all around the country to see what's happening in the personal stories. And just in the first few chapters, I learned a lot about marshes and the degradation of marshes and, the addition of salt, killing off areas where previously things could grow normally, the relationship between the salt and the fresh water. And the book was actually nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. So I'd just like to recommend it to people. And I'm actually taking a class this fall via Zoom where this is our textbook. So I recommend it.
I have read it, Paula. I really liked it.
And
it's really informative.
And just this last chapter I read, I think maybe explained for me the terrible smell coming from the marshes along High Street. So, anyway.
Thanks, Paula. Does anyone else have any input on, what keeps you up at night? What coastal resilience issues are you most concerned about before we move on to the next question? Are you seeing any hands raised on your end, Noah or Victoria? Okay. So we can keep going. Jason asked you all to share things that you love about Hampton. And so I kind of want to build on that question. I'm curious if any of the things that you love, whether they're people, places, things, are they in high-risk areas or areas that are vulnerable to flooding? And are you concerned about that? And do you think something needs to be done in order to protect them, adapt them, or maintain them in light of some of the coastal flood risks that we're facing? So are any of the things that you love in vulnerable areas? And if so, what should we think about doing to protect them?
Hi, it's Anne.
Hi, Anne.
Hi. I love the salt marsh, and I worry that I don't know how we protect it or how we help to keep it healthy and doing what it's supposed to be doing as a giant sponge. But I understand that it's one of our great assets in helping to, if not control sea level rise and flooding and stuff, at least accommodating it somehow. And I think whatever it is we need to do, we should be doing it.
Great, thank you. Lori?
I love the end of High Street where the secret spot is and where Cinnamon Rainbows is. I think it's really quaint. I understand it might not be staying that way forever. There's projects that are always potentially popping up. And I appreciate being a Hampton resident, having the parking right across the street. It's resident parking across the street on both ends, on one side of High Street and across where the wall is. And when the water's been coming up higher, I think those parking spaces selfishly might be gone, as well as those little businesses that are enjoyable for families to go out to eat or get their surfboards or get a smoothie and be able to park there. They could be gone. I don't know what the answer would be. I know you can make walls higher, but I don't know what the answer would be to help salvage that area.
Okay, great. Thanks for listing off some specific locations. Anyone else? Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit. I think it's easy to focus on the challenges, but one thing I want to start talking about is the opportunities that Hampton has ahead of itself. One of the poll questions asked you what types of solutions or adaptation strategies or resiliency options you would like to see the town pursue. And so some of the top responses to that poll question were to secure funding for projects, public education and awareness, and then enact regulations. And so I'm curious if you wouldn't mind expanding on any of those things or offering suggestions for any additional kinds of actions that you'd like to see the community take moving forward in order to address its coastal flood risk issues and start building coastal resilience in Hampton. And if it's helpful, you can think about that framework or the categories of action. So no action, avoiding, accommodating, resisting, or relocating, if that helps to guide your thoughts.
Hi, it's Anne again. One of the things that I find hard to respond to your question is because I don't know what the options are. If, for example, the marsh, if we had more of it, would it help in preventing erosion or in absorbing a little bit of sea level rise? And if so, how could we do that rather than building seawalls? And is that a viable option? I think I feel as I at least need some more information about some techniques that might be available.
Thanks, Anne. It looks like we lost Natalie, but the rest of us were able to hear your answer. Great, thanks. Welcome back, Natalie. Anne was saying that it's hard to identify solutions, not knowing what the options are and what the best way to go about protecting different features is. Sorry, Anne, I guess you could just be saying this again anyways, but she was also mentioning that for the wetlands, you know, what's the best way to protect them, and how do we make them best able to protect the other parts of the community that they protect? Did I capture that relatively well, Anne?
Yeah, I think so. I attended a tour of the salt marsh a few years ago and learned so much about what it does as being this giant sponge, and how it does protect our seacoast. And I just would love to know if there are positive steps that we can take to, instead of fighting back by building cement walls, if there are other choices that we can do. Until I know that, it's hard to suggest them.
Sure. Understood.
Paula had her hand up before.
I think, you know, I'm not that familiar with as far as building regulations close to the marsh. I understand that many of the neighborhoods that some of us may live in now are actually the result of marsh being filled in decades and decades ago. You look at some of the old historic photos of Hampton, and even, you know, at North Beach, much of what is currently a residential area originally, I believe, was marsh. And yet people continue to build even, you know, large scale developments right adjacent to the marsh, or what was perhaps originally filled area. You know, I'm thinking like across from Boar's Head, where the seafood restaurant was, I've seen signs that a new development is going in there, and that's right on top of the marshes. And that has to have some kind of impact on the ecosystem and the habitat and so forth. And that's just, you know, one example of many, I'm sure.
Great, thanks, Paula. Brian, do you want to add to that?
You know, this discussion is so great. I mean, I'll tell you, all you guys and Paula, are so glad to talk to you, because you really get some great things. You know, one of the things that, and I was one of the ones that put public education, because if you remember, in the town of Hampton, and specifically if you're talking the beach area, which most of what we're talking about from the marshes into the beach area, we have 7 state agencies that work and play and make decisions about state properties. And we've got one of the best town officials we ever had, and Jason Bashand. I'm telling you, he's been such a love having. And the reason that's important is he started to address bringing a lot of these bodies together. DES, you talk about Fish and Game, you talk about EPA, you talk about the Army Corps of Engineers. The reason, and I think Ann would be on the same path too, I think we need to marry those groups. I don't know if it's quarterly, whatever, and educate we as Hampton residents too on what needs to be done by us, by our children, by visitors, grandchildren, whatever, to continue to see these, you know, tributaries, salt marshes, just my terminologies, to keep it nice for years to come. And what do we need to do to help? So an opportunity, I think, and I've been a big believer in this, just as how we message things in Hampton when we put things out over Channel 22 and other social media, is educating the public. And I bet a lot of people don't even know the influence that the state and their entities have in decision makings that eventually affect people who live here and visit here. So I just put that out there because to me, education is key. And I think bringing those groups together is going to bring us a long way into this thing we call coastal opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Any last minute thoughts before I turn it back over to Noah?
Yeah, it's Anne again, if I may.
Of course.
Can you, one of the reasons why we've really been motivated to get the master plan revisited was because the goals identified in the master plan are what drive the ordinances that control our development, either allow it or disallow it. And the ordinances we have now don't have the direction from a master plan statement that says we need to control development in areas that are low-lying, that may not be wetlands yet, but are gonna be in the next 5 years. And we need protective statements in the master plan for protecting the areas that we value the most, so that we can develop the ordinances that will help us do that. And that's precisely why we're doing this exercise. So we just need to say, we want to protect the coastline. We want to preserve it. We want to limit development on the edges. And be very clear about that so that we can develop the ordinances that will restrict what needs to be restricted for the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne.
Natalie, I saw two hands. I just
Oh,
want to
sure.
point out, Mary had her hand up before. I don't know if you still want to say something, and then maybe Alex afterwards has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I joined late to the meeting and I'm a new resident to Hampton, but I echo what a lot of people have said, and my things that I worry about are the way that we've developed really static infrastructure, and the coastline by nature is really dynamic, and how we can kind of adapt to a changing coastline with the structures that we've already put in place, like the seawall, and thinking about developing in floodplains and trying to create incentives or disincentives for future development in a floodplain, and trying to get people to build farther away from the coast. I know it's really hard to take away things that you've already given people, but trying to incentivize that kind of buffer zone already, giving the coast, 500 feet, a mile for future development. Hard to change what's already there, but that's what I think about.
Thanks, Mary. Welcome to Hampton.
Thank you.
And Alex had his hand up too.
Yeah, I think one of those options on there was about providing incentives or incentivizing people to do something.
Yeah.
Just thinking to that, I know we talked a lot about development, but for the structures that are already there and are going to continue to be there, if there's any way to provide incentives to property owners, whether it's raising their structures, you see that happening down at the beach a lot now. People are choosing to do that, moving it away from the wetlands, and how to encourage things like that, whether it's moving out of the buffer. I don't know whether that's making it easier through approval processes. I think they have with raising structures already through warrant articles, some sort of tax incentives, waiving fees. Because I think down the road, you're going to see more and more people that are going to be turning to the town asking, what is the town going to do about the flooding, when we should be kind of encouraging people to look at what they can do now with their existing homes or properties or structures.
Great. Thank you so much. That wraps it up for me, Noah. If you want to take us home.
Will do. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and for coming. I'll just quickly let you know what comes next. We just did this. So our next steps, we're going to continue collecting public input through the text campaign and online survey, which I'll show that information on the next page. And we have this workshop that we did today and the workshop yesterday. We'll take all of that input and everything relevant to the vision we'll use to create a draft vision that'll sound something like what Jason had put forth in terms of general structure. You know, we'll have a statement that's built off of what we're hearing from the residents. We'll also start working on the coastal resilience aspect of the master plan. That'll include a vulnerability assessment, which will build on existing information that has been created and collected from in other studies and from other organizations. For example, the Tides to Storms effort that has a lot of information about what's at risk in Hampton. And other ongoing studies that the town is currently undertaking, and the town's Department of Public Works and consultants are undertaking. So we have a lot of information that we'll be able to look at to see what the risks are with regard to climate change and coastal hazards. We'll look at that and again, taking information that we're collecting from the public, build some resiliency and adaptation strategies for the town, and that'll be incorporated into a draft coastal management content for the master plan. That draft vision and the draft coastal management content will be available for review. There'll be other public participation opportunities throughout this process, and then public opportunities to review those draft documents. And then once that's all complete, that'll finish this phase 1 that Jason mentioned at the beginning. And then phase 2 will take these products, the vision and coastal management content, and use that to start building the complete comprehensive master plan. So if you have more to say, or if you think you know somebody else who might have something to say and you want to get as much input as possible, we want to get as much input as possible. There's 2 ongoing efforts at the moment. This survey at surveymonkey.com/r/planhampton, or you can text ideas to this phone number, 603-968-0712. We can post the link in the chat box, or if people need help with that, if they can't see the screen, we can stick around afterwards and explain that to you. But yeah, and you can also visit the project website on the town website, which we'll share that link in a moment also. So again, thank you all for coming. It's a little bit over 8:30, so that's our hour and a half that we scheduled for this. So people should feel very free to go. And we hope to hear from you later. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.